Good morning. It's good to see you this morning. Hope you're doing well. It is the Gospels Wednesday. We're going to be in Matthew chapter 15 looking at the same verses we looked at yesterday. I want you to think about different reasons that people would ask Jesus questions. Sometimes they asked him questions just to entrap him, wanted to catch him up in some sin. It never worked. He dealt with those questions rather speedily. Other times people asked him questions because they just wanted to justify themselves, justify some sin in their own lives. Other times people asked him questions because they wanted to condemn someone else, looking down their nose at someone else. But every once in a while someone would ask him a question because they really wanted to know the answer. They really wanted help. People ask questions for the same reasons. Today I would suggest sometimes it's just to trap someone. Sometimes they just want to justify themselves. Sometimes they just want to condemn someone across the aisle. But sometimes they just really want help and they want to know the answers. But I would suggest there's another reason that sometimes people ask questions. In Matthew 15 at verse 11, Jesus says, "Not what goes into the mouth defiles a man, but what comes out of the mouth, this defiles a man." Then the disciples came and said, "Do you know that the Pharisees were offended when they heard this saying?" Right? Because the Lord basically just said, there's no such thing as unclean food. And they say, do you know the Pharisees, that they have a lot of trouble with what you just said? I would suggest the disciples had a lot of trouble with what Jesus said. You know, it's going to be years later that you're going to have Peter in the Cornelius account, as the Lord says, "Rise, Peter, kill and eat." And Peter's going to say, "Not so, Lord, I've never eaten anything unclean." So as the disciples say, do you know that the Pharisees were offended when they heard the saying? Sometimes we'll ask a question, but we'll put it in we'll say it something like, "I know a fella who believes," or "I have a friend who does," or something along those lines. We'll pass it off as someone else when the person that we're really talking about is ourselves. The disciples say, "Do you know that the Pharisees," when I wonder if the people who they're not really talking about are themselves. Because Peter, to his credit, a little bit later, he finally works up his nerve and he says, "Explain this parable to us." See, sometimes we're too afraid to just say we don't understand, and we say, "I know a man," or "I have a friend." Right? Sometimes we're too afraid. You know, we may think that it's a silly question, or we may think that in admitting that we don't know, we're admitting that we're not as understanding as we need to be. That when we put ourselves out there like that, what we understand is we're humbling ourselves, admitting we don't know everything. What it all amounts to is we're just too proud to say we're the ones who don't get it. We're the ones who need help understanding. We cannot be too proud to do that. And we shouldn't try to pass it off as someone. We need to be humble enough to come to the Lord and say, "Explain it to us." We need to be like the eunuch who says, "How can I unless someone guides me? How can I understand?" And we need help. Here the disciples, the Pharisees, they were offended, but I would suggest the disciples were also having a good bit of trouble. And when we have trouble, we better not be too afraid to ask for help. Hope you enjoyed this study today. God bless you. Be a blessing to others. We'll see you tomorrow morning.